Alright, guys, so welcome to part 2 of the Jack the Ripper video. If you have not seen part 1, go watch that. I will link it in the description below. Alright, so let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the suspects. So, the concentration of the killings around weekends and public holidays and within a few streets of each other has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have thought that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. Such theories draw on cultural perceptions such as fear of the medical profession, mistrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Suspects proposed years after the murders include virtually anyone remotely connected to the case by contemporary documents, as well as many famous names who were never considered in the police investigation. Everyone alive at the time is now dead, and modern authors are free to accuse anyone without any need for supporting historical evidence. Suspects named in contemporary police documents include 3 in Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum, but the evidence against them is circumstantial at best. There are many and varied theories about the identity and profession of Jack the Ripper, but authorities are not agreed upon any of them, and the number of named suspects reaches over 100. Despite continued interest in the case, the Ripper's identity remains unknown. Now for something pretty interesting that not many serial killers do. The Zodiac Killer did it. The killer in an upcoming video did a little dabbling in this, but Jack the Ripper wrote a lot of letters to the media, and especially the newspapers, obviously, because that was their only media during the time. So let's talk a little bit about those. So over the course of the Ripper murders, the police, newspapers, and others received hundreds of letters regarding the case. Some were well-intentioned offers of advice for catching the killer, but the vast majority were useless. Hundreds of letters claimed to have been written by the killer himself, and 3 of these in particular are prominent: the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. The Dear Boss letter, dated the 25th of September, was postmarked the 27th of September in 1888. It was received that day by the Central News Agency and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on the 29th of September. Initially, it was considered a hoax, but when Eddowes was found 3 days after the letter's postmark, with one ear partially cut off, the letter's promise to clip the lady's ears off gained attention. Eddowes' ear appeared to have been nicked by the killer incidentally during his attack, and the letter writer's threat to send the ears to police was never carried out. The name Jack the Ripper was first used in this letter by the signatory and gained worldwide notoriety after its publication. Most of the letters that followed copy this letter's tone. Some sources claimed that another letter dated the 17th of September 1888 was the first to use the name Jack the Ripper, but most experts believe that that was fake, inserted into police records in the 20th century. The Saucy Jackie postcard was postmarked the 1st of October 1888 and was received the same day by the Central News Agency. The handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter. It mentions that 2 victims were killed very close to one another, double event this time, which was thought to refer to the murders of Stride and Eddowes. It has been argued that the letter was posted before the murders were even publicized, making it unlikely that a crank would have such knowledge of the crime. But it was postmarked more than 24 hours after the killings took place, long after details were known and being published by journalists and talked about by residents of the area. The From Hell letter was received by George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, on the 16th of October in 1888. The handwriting and style is unlike that of the Dear Boss letter and Saucy Jackie postcard. The letter came with a small box in which Lusk discovered half a kidney preserved in spirits of wine. Eddowes' left kidney had been removed by the killer. The writer claimed that he fried and ate the missing kidney half. There is a disagreement over the kidney. Some contend that it belonged to Eddowes, while others argue it was a practical joke. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who determined it was human and from the left side, but he could not determine any other biological characteristics. Openshaw subsequently also received a letter signed Jack the Ripper. Scotland Yard published the Dear Boss letter and the postcard on the 3rd of October in the ultimately vain hope that someone would recognize the handwriting. Charles Warren explained in a letter to Godfrey Lushington, Permanent Under Secretary of State for the Home Department, "I think the whole thing is a hoax, but of course we are bound to try and ascertain the writer in any case." On the 7th of October in 1888, George R. Sims in the Sunday newspaper Referee implied scathingly that the letter was written by a journalist to hurl the circulation of a newspaper sky high. The police officials later claimed to have identified a specific journalist as the author of both the Dear Boss letter and the postcard. The journalist was identified as Tom Bullen, and a letter from Chief Inspector John Littlechild to George R. Sims dated the 23rd of September 1913. A journalist called Fred Best reportedly confessed in 1931 that he and a colleague at The Star had written the letters signed Jack the Ripper to heighten interest in the murders and keep the business alive. The Ripper murders mark an important watershed in the treatment of crime by journalists. Jack the Ripper was not the first serial killer, but his case was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. Tax reforms in the 1850s had enabled the publication of inexpensive newspapers with wider circulation. These mushroomed in the later Victorian era to include mass circulation newspapers as cheap as a halfpenny, along with the popular magazines such as the Illustrated Police News, which made Ripper the beneficiary of previously unparalleled publicity. After the murder of Nichols in early September, the Manchester Guardian reported that whatever information may be in possession of the police, they deem it necessary to keep secret. It is believed that their attention is particularly directed to a notorious character known as Leather Apron. Journalists were frustrated by the unwillingness of the CID to reveal details of their investigation to the public, and so resorted to writing reports of questionable veracity. Imaginative descriptions of Leather Apron appeared in the press, but rival journalists dismissed these as mythical outgrowth of the reporter's fancy. John Pizer, a local Jew who made footwear from leather, was known by the name Leather Apron and was arrested, even though the investigating inspector reported that at present there is no evidence whatsoever against him. He was soon released after the confirmation of his alibis. After the publication of the Dear Boss letter, Jack the Ripper supplanted Leather Apron as the name adopted by the press and public to describe the killer. The name Jack was already used to describe another fabled London attacker, Spring-Heeled Jack, who supposedly leapt over walls to strike at his victims and escape as quickly as he came. The invention and adoption of a nickname for a particular killer became standard media practice, with examples such as the Axeman of New Orleans, the Boston Strangler, and the Beltway Sniper. Examples derived from Jack the Ripper include the French Ripper, the Dusseldorf Ripper, the Camden Ripper, and the Blackout Ripper, Jack the Stripper, the Yorkshire Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Sensational press reports combined with the fact that no one was ever convicted of the murders have confused scholarly analysis and created a legend that casts a shadow over later serial killers. The nature of the murders and the victims drew attention to the poor living conditions in the East End and galvanized public opinion against the overcrowded, unsanitary slums. In the 2 decades after the murders, the worst of the slums were cleared and demolished, but the streets and some buildings survive, and the legend of the Ripper is still promoted by guided tours of the murder sites. The 10 Bells public house in Commercial Street was frequented by at least one of the victims, and was the focus of such tours for many years. In 2015, the Jack the Ripper Museum opened in East London. In the immediate aftermath of the murders and later Jack the Ripper became the children's boogeyman, depictions were often phantasmic or monstrous. In the 1920s and 30s, he was depicted in film dressed in everyday clothes as a man with a hidden secret, preying on his unsuspecting victims. Atmosphere and evil were suggested through lighting effects and shadow play. By the 1960s, The Ripper had become the symbol of a predatory aristocracy and was more often portrayed in a top hat dressed as a gentleman. The establishment as a whole became the villain, with the Ripper acting as a manifestation of upper-class exploitation. The image of the Ripper merged with or borrowed symbols from horror stories, such as Dracula's Cloak or Victor Frankenstein's Organ Harvest. The fictional work of the Ripper confused with multiple genres, ranging from Sherlock Holmes to Japanese erotic horror. In addition to the contradictions and unreliability of contemporary accounts, attempts to identify the real killer are hampered by the lack of surviving forensic evidence. DNA analysis on extant letters is inconclusive. The available material has been handled many times and is too contaminated to provide meaningful results. There have been mutually incompatible claims that DNA evidence points conclusively to two different suspects, and the methodology of both has also been criticized. Jack the Ripper features in hundreds of works of fiction, and works in which straddle the boundaries between fact and fiction, including the Ripper Letters and a hoax diary of Jack the Ripper. The Ripper appears in novels, short stories, poems, comic books, games, songs, plays, operas, television programs, and films. More than 100 nonfiction works deal exclusively with Jack the Ripper murders, making it one of the most written about true crime subjects. The term Ripperology was coined by Colin Wilson in the 1970s to describe the study of the case by professionals and amateurs. The periodicals Ripperana, Ripperologist, and Ripper Notes published their research. There is no waxwork figure of Jack the Ripper at Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors, unlike murderers of lesser fame, in accordance with their policy of not modeling persons whose likeness is unknown. He is instead depicted as a shadow. In 2006, BBC History magazine and its readers selected Jack the Ripper as the worst Briton in history. Okay guys, that concludes the video about Jack the Ripper. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new you didn't know about Jack the Ripper. If you have any theories about who this gentleman could possibly be, don't be afraid to throw them down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this 2-part series about one of my personal favorite serial killers. Who is your favorite serial killer? Leave it in the comments below and maybe I'll do a video about it. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next one. Love you so very much. Bye!